Anchor Text. Building a New Barn by Martina Burns. Not a lot happens in our town, so news travels slowly. But this was different. As soon as we heard, we ran to the scene. The rest of the people from the town were already there, watching old Mr. Lau's barn going up in flames. There wasn't a lot the firemen could do, but at least Mr. Lau was safe. Mr. Lau lived on a farm just outside of town. He was old, but still he had a keen mind and a will to work hard. Since his wife died, he kept to himself. He worked the land and took care of his animals. People often called to ask his advice on farming or how to help sick animals. They liked spending time with him as he was gentle and wise. The day after the fire, people drove out to see the barn. Smoke was still rising from the ruins. The heat from the black beams kept everyone from going too close. Mr. Lau looked weak and helpless. He didn't speak. He just shook his head and rubbed the tears from his eyes. Tom's dad suggested we start a fund to help rebuild the barn. Other people offered to give timbers or doors. Others offered their time. Within a day, enough men had offered to build the barn for Mr. Lau. Some of the men visited Mr. Lau and told him what they were going to do. He was thankful for their help. My dad is an architect. He offered to draw up plans for the barn. He talked to Mr. Lau, and together they planned how it should look. After that, my dad met with carpenters and builders, and they all agreed on a date to start. That evening, I asked Dad to see the plans. "Of course, Jack," he said. He rolled them out on his office desk and talked to me about them. Dad knew I hoped to be an architect one day, but I preferred to be outdoors rather than doing my schoolwork. I loved walking in the woods near our town. I loved to see the trees changing colors. I liked the feeling of wood and the smell of wood. So many things can be made from wood, and I wanted to make them all. I wasn't sure working in an office would suit me. I just hoped that it would be a life I could grow to like. One foggy morning later that week, a crew of helpers arrived at the site of the burnt-out barn. Some of them were construction workers from the town. Some of them came from nearby farms. They were all ready and willing to work. Digger drivers arrived. They tore down the old barn and loaded it onto trucks to be taken away. Mr. Lau and the workers were happy to see the last of the burnt planks disappear from view. Once the site was clear, they were ready to begin. Dad called the workmen round and explained the drawings to them. I felt very proud of my dad. His work was important to the success of the job. I could see that the men looked up to him. I hoped that someday men would look at me like that. They asked him questions, and he answered each one. Tom's dad was the foreman. I asked him if I could help out, and he agreed. First, they marked and dug the foundation. The foundation showed where the new barn would be. The foundations were filled with cement so that the barn would have a strong base. The men took great care that the foundations were straight, strong, and level. I thought they were spending too much time checking the foundation. No one would ever see it. One of the builders looked at me and said, "Remember this, Jack. Everything you do in life should have a good foundation." After lunch, the carpenters began making the frame for each wall. I watched as they measured and marked the wood and checked my dad's plans. "Come on, kid, do something," they joked. I was glad to help. I got planks for them and handed them tools as they needed them. They used saws to cut the planks into exact lengths. I loved the smell of the cut timber. I loved seeing the sawdust flying out from the saw and forming a neat pile on the ground. I picked up some of the cut-off pieces of wood and put them in my pocket. Some planks were nailed together. Others were screwed. I held the pieces for the men, or handed them their tools. Bigger pieces were drilled out and bolted together. They checked their work often to make sure everything was straight and level. I realized these men were skilled workmen. They took pride in getting the pieces to fit together. They made it look so simple. It felt great to be part of the crew and part of the project. Soon it got dark. It was time to go home. I sat in the back of Dad's car as he drove home. We were both too tired to talk. In my bedroom, I took the pieces of wood out of my pocket and put them next to my bed. I fell asleep thinking of all the different things I could do with those bits of wood. The next morning, Dad and I were back on site early. The men were already at work. Soon it was time to raise the frames for the barn. Workers lifted the frames into place using machines. It was difficult work. Other workers climbed up to nail and bolt the frames into place. The roof was next. Men climbed the frames. Rafters were lifted into place. The men had to be good at balancing on the frame so they didn't fall. Some had to cling to the beams as they worked. Long planks of wood stretched across the top of the barn. All the parts were nailed down, and soon the roof was secure and strong. Then the man nailed boards to the sides of the barn. It was almost dark when the last nail was hammered into place. The workers felt a tide of excitement as the job was coming to an end. Despite being tired, they were happy and smiling. Mr. Lau's new barn was finished. The new barn looked great. Mr. Lau wanted to thank everyone. The crew stood round, and Mr. Lau began to thank the men. But the words wouldn't come. He just managed to whisper, "Thank you." The workers clapped, and many of them wiped a tear from their dusty faces. That night, Dad and I talked about the barn. "The foundation was the slowest part," I said. "Once that was in place, the rest of the barn went up quickly." "The foundation is the most important thing," Dad replied. "If it's wrong, everything after that will be wrong too. A good foundation is at the heart of all we do in life. Jack, always remember that." He picked up his pencil from his office desk and rolled it between his fingers for a moment. Then slowly, he placed it behind my ear. These events took place many years ago. The barn has stood the test of time and is still as straight and as strong as the day it was built. I drive past it on my way to work each day and think about how that barn changed my life.